Seattle Kraken president, CEO, and part owner Tod Leiweke had some things to say about the state of the franchise.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another edition of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Erica L. Ayala. I am your host of Locked On Kraken. You can also find me as a contributor and CBS HQ analyst. I write mostly about women's basketball, pretty much exclusively about women's basketball right now, and am a CBS HQ contributor, like I said, and talking a lot of hockey because of Four Nations. So I enjoy that. I alluded to this on yesterday's episode. I wanted to talk Four Nations, but there's also been some conversation with CEO and President Tod Liwicki. Our local radio station KJR, the Kraken local radio station KJR, does their President's Day roundup, which I think is really clever. And so they spoke to Tod Leiweke as a part of that, getting a state of the franchise, so to speak. And Tod Leiweke had a few interesting quotes, chief among them this one right here.
My words. In my career, if you go look, I've been associated with teams that won and eventually got to the promised land, and we're going to do that here.
Yeah.
We're going to do that here. We're going to do that here. And I will play the rest of the quote for you. But, Tod Leiweke talking about a lot of different things, everything from Pete Carroll to the NBA returning to Seattle. He talked about Four Nations, but he also talked about the Seattle Kraken franchise, making it known that he's excited about the prospects. So those are some of the good things. I mean, that's always something people talk about when it comes to the Seattle Kraken. We know that, right? He also talked about Jordan Eberle going down and how that was a big impact, the new coaching staff, and how, of course, that was a big impact on how the franchise is faring. He also said, kind of in the same breath, though, those sound like excuses. Yeah, Todd, they kind of do. I'm glad you noticed they do kind of sound like excuses, because putting the Eberle injury aside, and the coaching staff, yes, we know the coaching staff is new. That being said, if you listen to this podcast, I think I've made it pretty clear that the issues this team is facing are not solely because the captain went down, not solely because we have a new coaching staff. There is a lack of motivation that is prevalent, that exists. Players, quite frankly, just underperforming. And I'm going to get to how, if at all, this can be impacting the trade deadline coming up later on the show. But, I thought that another interesting quote that Todd had on this program, the ownership group wants to get to where we're going faster. Now, I thought it was interesting. Of course, he's a part of the ownership group, so perhaps he was speaking from what he knows. But it goes to some of the critiques that we've heard of Ron Francis. It goes to some of the criticisms that we've heard about the Seattle Kraken. And is there a divide? Is there a difference between how the ownership group feels about it, how the coaching staff feels about it, and of course, how the front office feel about where this team needs to be? He talked about, again, the prospects, the pipeline being, quote, how you build a long-term competitive team. And that's something that we've been hearing about. But what he also said, Tod Leiweke, is that there are things that need to happen. He, throughout the interview, alluded to at one point the offense need to get some more goals. I think we all agree with that. But he also says this is not a rebuild. It is a reclamation. He also said, Tod Leiweke, that this is not a rebuild. It's a reclamation. But here's my question. And I feel like I've been talking about this a lot this season and throughout the last year and a half. what is this Kraken team trying to reclaim? What is the culture that exists, the good bits, right? What are the good bits that this team is trying to reclaim? What exactly does that look like? I've said it, that season 2 appearance in the Stanley Cup playoffs, we arrived too early and didn't harness what was working. And perhaps it was just luck. There is a decent amount of luck that goes into competition, and that you have to factor in. But he talks about this idea of conviction, and you're going to hear that in the clip because I'm going to play the rest of it for you. He talks a lot about conviction, but sometimes you have to stay convicted, especially when you're quote unquote winning, or especially when the numbers are right, because that win, that taste of success can sometimes knock you off your habits. And I think I'm talking specifically about what we've seen as far as the bad habits when it comes to players. But I think this also, I know it also goes beyond just athletic performance. It goes to all performance. And so I thought this was an interesting interview. I don't think Todd really gave much away, but it's a good thing to have someone like Todd be able to address what's going on. And to that end, let's hear what else he had to say.
And without airing some of that out, there was a conviction, and it's more than a desire. It's an absolute conviction that we're going to get there one way or another. I think that we feel the pressure, but we also feel the excitement because we think some good things are coming.
So we feel the pressure, but we feel the excitement because we know some good things are coming. There's a lot, again, that I think we could really nitpick when it comes to this interview, but I implore you, go check it out. I will leave the link in the show notes, and let me know, question of the day, what did you make of Todd Leiwike's interview? What were your main takeaways, your favorite quotes? We'll talk about all of that and more as the season marches on. But first, of course, we have to get through Four Nations. And what will the trade deadline look like for the Seattle Kraken? We'll get into all that coming up on today's episode. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 100% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats that help keep you feeling fuller longer. So get snacking and get cracking, whether you are at your desk, you're on the go, like I often am. Sometimes you want some like a crunchy little snack. Wonderful Pistachios has you. So again, get snacking, get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Hey, thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken, also a contributor over at CBS Sports. I've written for the Seattle Kraken before they even were the Seattle Kraken, and a bunch of other places like the New York Times, Forbes, Sports Illustrated. Yeah, I kind of done some things, and I'm glad to be here as your host. Want to talk about trade rumors? I mean, the thing that I really am going to talk about is that even people who it's their literal job and they make a really strong argument for some of the trade rumors across the NHL, even people like that, like Frank Saravelli, are getting tired of having to hear the same old same from the Seattle Kraken. And I'm going to read what Frank Saravelli had to say. Rough criticism here of the Seattle Kraken. Here's what he had to say. We're all waiting for ultra-conservative GM Ron Francis to do something, to be pushed into a move that he doesn't necessarily have to make. Moving Yanni Gourde and Brandon Tanev doesn't count. I want to stop there. There's more to this, but I think this is interesting, and I think I agree with Frank. This is from the Daily Faceoff. This was posted earlier this month, actually, but I wanted to talk about it now. We've focused on trade rumors here and there. And what Frank is saying is absolutely right. We continue to see a lot of the same names going around. The most recent name added to the mix, Jared McCann, Jamie Alexiak has been a part of that, and Oliver Bjorkstrand, which is actually who Frank is going to go on to talk about. But I think that there is something to him saying that at this point, some of these names, they don't count. He says that moves like Yanni Gord and Brandon Tanev, those are expected and obvious. Now, I do want to pause here as well because I don't think it's the job of an organization to make moves solely for entertainment, shock, and awe value. That being said, not making moves, I do have a theory, and I cover other teams in other sports leagues that I think are the same. I do have a theory that the lack of movement for trade deadline after trade deadline after trade deadline, free agency after free agency after free agency, does perhaps give your franchise a not so favorable reputation. I think that impacts them from the player perspective more than the coaches and GMs, specifically the GMs, obviously, who would be making trades. But I do think that's my feeling. I kind of feel like it does impact. That being said, also, I will say the Seattle Kraken, and if you've heard the last handful of episodes, or if you listen to the squad show that I believe will go up today, Wednesday, I'm very put out that, mainstream media, very broadly, loosely speaking, doesn't put a lot of respect on the Seattle Kraken. Now, again, don't think you should make moves solely for the shock and awe factor. And I think there's a little bit of a balance. How do you get your team in the news cycle and then in the news circuit for all of the good reasons? And I think that's some of what we see the Seattle Kraken doing. State-of-the-art facility. Obviously, it's a brand new facility. I will say I've liked the vibe and culture at Climate Pledge more than OBS Arena, but Long Island is getting an all-star weekend before the Seattle Kraken. Okay. We did get a Winter Classic, but that was at T-Mobile Park and not at Climate Pledge Arena. So those are some of the things that as a franchise, so as someone who's president, CEO, part owner, those are things absolutely that he would want to wrestle with, kind of move the needle on. When it comes, though, to trades, how much do you want your team a part of trade negotiations, but how much trade rumors, I should say, how much, though, is your team impacted negatively, perhaps, if your team isn't in conversations and your GM has a tag that comes with him as, quote, ultra conservative? Are we missing out on prospects because we're taking too much time? We're too methodical. We gave away 7 and 7 is what I like to say. We did give away some big money. Is it the right move? It's hard to say. I don't think it doesn't seem worth it right now, but will it be down the road? Because, part of what I think is happening is that the personnel for the Seattle Kraken, that being the players, it's not a group of players that is going to get this team to where I think Tod Leiweke was talking about when he talked about, wanting to be the kind of team that when they get to the playoffs, they stay in the. We've been hearing that from the Kraken from the beginning, since before they had players. And then they got to the playoffs and they haven't been back, haven't even been close since. So there's a little bit of kind of sports speak happening, I think, with the Seattle Kraken. And what that actually looks like, well, I guess we'll find out soon because the trade deadline marching around the corner. So again, this is not a new name, and also this article is not all that new, but Oliver Bjorkstrand is someone that, for that reason, Frank Saravelli thinks could be on the move. Quote, he's been productive relative to play, and he has actual value for the Kraken, as an acquiring team would get 2 playoff runs out of Bjorkstrand. The short-term pain of Bjorkstrand's absence moving forward is largely irrelevant because the Kraken are going nowhere fast. Ooh, brutal. And I don't think he's wrong. So we'll see what happens for the trade deadline. I talked about this with Gil Martin. If you listen to the Locked On NHL show on Monday, I played a little bit of that yesterday on yesterday's episode. But yeah, the Kraken making moves has to happen. And yeah, I kind of feel like he's right. What's the worst that can happen? The team's not getting it done on the ice. So something has to give. And you already changed up the coaching staff. So the front office has to be willing to make hard decisions, or else the hard decision will be made for them. And we will get to know if Ron Francis was correct. You don't want to be the first GM of a new franchise, of an expansion franchise. You'll want to be second. Let's talk, though, about the upcoming schedule, which of course includes four nations, but also the return to the ice for your Seattle Kraken. All right, Kraken fans, big game in the world of hockey tomorrow as the United States and Canada go head to head in the Four Nations Face-Off Final. We have some Locked On NHL hosts, Trey Matthews and Rachel Donner, who I work with for the Women's Hockey Report. They will be on site. Can't wait to hear their insights from the game. But we're going to talk Four Nations a little bit more tomorrow. Today, we're going to focus mostly on the Kraken. And your Kraken are already in South Florida. That is because they are on the road taking on the Florida Panthers, the Tampa Bay Lightning, and then they take on the St. Louis Blues before returning home on March 1st to take on Vancouver. That's going to be a big one. Lots of improvements needed for this Seattle Kraken team. What can they get done in the next few games? Yes, they take on the Nashville Predators, and the Philadelphia Flyers. Leading up to that, we'll also then finish that East Coast swing with Washington. So what's going to happen at the trade deadline? We don't know. I think it's realistic. It's almost kind of favorable if the Seattle Kraken do make some moves. But again, super ultra conservative, as Frank Saravelli said, is our GM. So how is that going to impact things? It's hard to say. It's hard to say, but we do know the Seattle Kraken, they have a lot of work to do. And, I'm not convinced that this is a team that is willing to do it, which really stinks. That really is unfortunate. But if you look at some of the moves that folks want the Kraken to make outside of the names that are on the out, perhaps like Brandon Tanev, Yanni Gourde, Oliver Bjorkstrand, Andre Burakovsky has been mentioned, Jared McCann. You have to think about players you want to offload or need to offload, but also you have to think about players, that you're going to get some trade value from. So let's talk about from Bleacher Report, the Bleacher Report saying that maybe Brandon Tanev is a good fit for the Rangers. And we know that the Rangers have been making wholesale changes. So the Rangers GM traded away his 2025 first round pick and has no second rounders in the next 3 drafts. However, he could go for a hardworking bottom 6 rental forward like the Kraken's Brandon Tanev. He's an affordable $3.5 million cap hit and could only cost a 3rd round pick if Drury moves quickly. That's interesting. Is that something the Kraken want to take? The Kraken have prided themselves on building through the draft, but here's the thing. You need still players. You still need players around. And for the Seattle Kraken, the Bleacher Report saying the Seattle Kraken are 9 points out of the final Western wildcard spot, making it likely they'll miss the playoffs for the 3rd time in their 4-year existence. General manager Ron Francis could become a seller, shopping UFA-eligible players like Yanni Gourde, Brandon Tanev, 4 drafts, picks, and prospects. Francis could consider peddling veterans side beyond this season like Andre Burakovsky, Oliver Bjorkstrand, and Jamie Alexiak. He could seek promising young NHL players in return. Francis made a similar move by shipping defenseman Will Borgen to the New York Rangers for winger Kaapo Kakko. The move invigorated the 23-year-old Kakko, who has 17 points in 24 games since coming to Seattle. Finding similar talent could help the Kraken get closer to playoff contention next year and beyond. So it's not, I guess, when you need a little bit of everything, you just go young, right? Get the young players at a good price. You kind of sell off the farm, sell the ranch, so to speak. I think that's where we're at. I think the frustration for me is that, in my estimation, I don't think we needed to be here. I don't think the Seattle Kraken needed to be here. But Tod Leiweke says there's excitement. He says, again, the ownership group, he said, does want things to go faster, but selling off veterans for young players. I know you have a coach and a coaching staff that you believe can develop talent, and I still believe in them as well. I am not in that boat of Kraken followers that thinks that the gig is up for Dan Bylsma and his staff. I do think they need to retool on some things. They've shown that they can do that. So maybe they just need to continue doing some of those things. But this is a tough roster that they've been given, even outside of the injuries. This was going to be a tough roster. And going young does mean, for me, that this is still a Kraken team that we're not expecting to be back to the playoffs for another 2-3 seasons. And even if they do, does it become what happened in season 2, where we got there too soon and then didn't have the infrastructure to stay? The big question for me has to be, what are we getting from goaltending? And so if at the trade deadline, but specifically during free agency, the Seattle Kraken doesn't start answering that question, then I don't know how this is a team that's serious about finding the balance between winning in the immediate, right? Not this season. That seems like a foregone conclusion. The Kraken will not make the playoffs. But if you're not going to get serious about making some moves on the goaltending front, then to me, it's you're not serious about wanting to find the balance between winning in the future with the 36 prospects in the system. You're leaning wholly, all of your eggs are in that basket, and you're not focused on the here and now. And that, I do believe, will hurt the Kraken, maybe has already, because once you have big ticket free agents who maybe you didn't get while they were young stars, but now, for one reason or another, whether it's they want to change, their team needs to make room for some other superstar prospect that's in the pipeline. I don't know that we have a reputation for a free agent that wants to come to a winning team. I think there's a reputation for a lot of things, but let's be honest, winning isn't one of them. And that does matter. Pro careers are shorter than we think sometimes. We talk about these guys, and there's not so many, but there's a decent amount of elite level athletes that play for 10 plus years, and we think that's normal. It's not. It's a grind. And the Seattle Kraken, I don't know this for sure, but I wonder if we're missing an opportunity to build the foundation, to set the building blocks in earnest before maybe catering to a demographic that we're not ready for. And I don't even know who we're catering to, which is also the thing. Is this a team that believes in the youth movement? I don't know. Is it a team that wants to be veteran heavy? I mean, maybe to some extent. Is this a team that believes that having playoff experience is important? I think so, but having the right guys is as well. You have 20 players, 18 skaters, 2 goalies that are going to compete and win a Stanley Cup championship. Of those 20 players, how many were making big contributions that their veteran value in years is also worth their veteran value in actual minutes played? Because, yeah, you could point to the Stanley Cup champions on the Kraken roster, and do we have enough that are ready to take on leadership? This team needs a very substantial amount of leadership. It took forever to get another captain. Eberle, unfortunately, injured, but I like Eberle as a leader. I like Jaden Schwartz as a leader. I think Matty Beniers has to step up a little bit more. Shane Wright is stepping up. Capo Caco is, I don't know that he's going to be a leader in the same way as some of these other guys that I mentioned. I think he has the potential to be a leader, maybe like Jaden Schwartz, but he's got to get his game, he's got to get his confidence back, and he's got to get his game more consistent. So, there's a lot that I still don't fully understand about where the Seattle Kraken is right now. You say that you're not satisfied, that you want to win now, but you are glad that you have prospects for the future. Something seems to be missing. There's a conduit that doesn't exist right now for the Seattle Kraken to take this particular team, injuries and all, and move it to a team that is going to be ready for these young, promising prospects. Because the truth of the matter is, if you still say you want to win now, you want to do better now, then you run the risk of having to tap into that prospects well, because the players that you've brought in right now, what trade value do they offer? That's kind of how I feel about it. And that's tough. You can trade some of these guys, and you have to think about, does the trade make sense? Is there something from a leadership perspective, from a veteran, minutes played in the Stanley Cup playoffs perspective? Is it a chemistry thing? Can you bring in someone for Brandon Tanev, for Yanni Gourde, who's going to immediately click and get Burakovsky going, and get Jared McCann going, to get Matty Beniers going, to get Capo Caco going? I think those trades make sense if really you're saying we're not satisfied, we want to find a way to win now. Maybe that's how you have to think about it. But how many of those guys exist, are available, and are affordable? Lots of questions. I guess we'll see how it all pans out. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Before you close it all out, make sure you are listening to our friends over at Locked On NHL. They'll have you covered, of course, for the Four Nations face-off. And on Friday, Rachel and I will be back to talk about the Women's Hockey Report, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter, the local coverage you love from Locked On. Make sure you are tapped in to Locked On NHL. And we have a squad show coming up, so you can find that on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. But for this show, this episode of Locked On Kraken, a reminder to be kind to yourself, to be kind to others, and to hold fast, to stay true. And loud and proud we get as the Seattle Kraken will be hitting the road in South Florida. We're going to say, let's go Kraken. And let's go front office. Let's get some stuff done. Let's wreck it, Ralph. I'm here for it. I'll catch y'all on the next episode. Peace out, everyone.